And today we're going to talk about general tips and tricks about being productive in Visual Studio. And maybe actually let me introduce your panel for the day. Let's start with you, Martin. Martin is a truly amazing architect and is working as the CTO of Blue Fragments. And then we have Jesus, is that pronounced correctly? Joining from Peru. And he's a Microsoft MVP and a certified Xamarin developer. We also have Emmanuel with the tattoos. He's also an MVP and a GitHub star, Microsoft 365 architect, and a Twitch affiliate live coder. And then we have our special guest of the day, Jess Liberty, who's also a Microsoft MVP, a blogger, an author, and a well-known speaker, and our very own Visual Studio guru. So a big welcome to all of you. It's really nice to have you on the panel here today. So as mentioned, I'm gonna moderate the event, but we're gonna try to have like a set of topics that we're gonna go through today. So in a minute, I will give the word to Jess and let him kick it off. And from there, we're going to talk a bit about general tips and tricks. That could be shortcuts, intelligence, all of that. We're going to talk about better ways to read and write code, or some tips and tricks on that. And we're going to talk a bit about or discuss how to integrate with source control, because that is also something that takes up a lot of time for many of us. And then by the end of the hour, I will wrap it up. So with that, I will give the word to you, Jess. It's all yours.
Okay, you can hear me all right then.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, and it's good to be here. And let me lower your expectations. I do love Visual Studio, and I am in it all day, every day. As to whether I'm really a Visual Studio guru, well, we'll see as we go. I have a few tips and tricks that I would like to. Let me just shut the door. I know that's bad in the middle of a presentation, but it'll be quieter. Sorry, should have had that done before. So I have a few things to point out in Visual Studio that may be not as obvious or that I particularly like. There are trace points that are very easy to set. All you need to do is click on the line, set a breakpoint, and a light bulb will come up, and you can set the trace point. And you can add conditions to that trace point, which is very powerful. Let me show you, share my screen if I can. No, share my screen is not available to me. I think that's something you have to give me the ability to do.
Yeah, just a second. Let's verify that.
Not a problem. I can actually continue talking without that. Just have a second while I throw myself.
It should be available now.
Excellent. Yes, it is. Okay, so I made a very small example program which I called IntelliCode because I want to talk about IntelliCode. But the idea would be that you would come to a line of code and you would set a breakpoint, and then normally a light bulb would show up and it would offer you to create a trace point. And then you can go to your output window and you can clear from that output anything other than trace points. And that is a very powerful way to do debugging without a lot of clutter. The second thing that I wanted to tell you about, which I think is really interesting, is often when I'm coding, I come to a page and I'm not sure. I'm talking here about Xamarin coding, Xamarin Forms. I'll come to a page and I'm not sure what that page is. And one way to solve that problem is to clear your output window and then change to the page in question, and then go to the top of the output window and you will see the name of the page that you've just transferred to, which can be extremely useful in Xamarin Forms. A couple other things that you probably know about are Control Q, which takes you up to this search window. And in the search window, you can search for almost anything. There's an all setting and there's a code setting. Why aren't I getting anything? There we go. So I can say, show me everything with INTEL. I can say, just show me code that has INTEL, and show me anything built into Visual Studio that has got those letters in it. And this can be a very powerful way to navigate, especially if you don't remember where you put something, but you do remember a little bit about what's inside the file. If you're looking to find a particular file and you know the name of the file, then you can come over here and you can say INTELLICODE, and that will find all the files that have that name. So between those are really good ways to navigate around the system. All right, so the two things I really want to talk about are IntelliCode and inline hints. And IntelliCode has become so much more useful and intelligent than it used to be. Let me bring up my slides for that. Okay, IntelliCode now not only raises the most likely thing that you want to do next, but it also will attempt to fill in the line for you. And it's surprisingly useful. It gets it very, very frequently. And you hit tab and that whole line is filled in for you, which is tremendous. And on top of that, it learns. So let's run my little example, please. It'll work. Actually, I don't even need to run it now that I think about it. If I come over here into my example and I have and I type in int foo, I say that's equal to 5 and hit semicolon return. Oh, we didn't do it. Is that because we're running? Just bear with me. I didn't say this was going to be smooth. Let's see if we can cancel the run. This is like one of my favorite things, so I'm really hoping that it'll do it. Here it's saying, do you want to finish with equal 5? It remembers that that's what I did last time. And then when I hit enter, wow, didn't do it. Mind-blowingly, normally what it does is it puts up int bar equals 6, which I think is really funny that they have a bit of a sense of humor. But the main thing is that you begin to type, and it is going to fill in for you what it anticipates you might need. So if I come down here to my second example, and I say if space, and it says, well, I see that you have a class coming in as a parameter, and I anticipate that you want to check to see whether it's null. So all of this was generated by IntelliCode, and all I have to do is hit tab to accept that. And by the way, there is a setting to say that instead of hitting tab, you want to hit the right arrow, although I find that less convenient. So let's see if we can get, and we're going to try this one more time because I really want it to work. Notice it's offering me a throw new argument null exception if it is in fact null, which is kind of cute. And let's see, if food equal 5. No, it's just not going to work for me today. Okay, well, the demo gods are not with me. The last thing that I wanted to show you by way of introduction is inline hints. And this is one of my absolute favorite things in Visual Studio. What you see are in light gray, you see identification of type, or it gives you identification of, let's say you have a method which has a parameter that comes in and says true. Well, rather than having to go look at the calling method, it will have next to it in gray what that true represents, what field that is being set true, which can save a tremendous amount of time. So there are a lot of features. They're fairly easy to find in the menus. The place I normally start for that kind of thing, well, the place I normally start for that kind of thing is on Google, because that's the easiest way to find out where things are. But almost all of them are under tools, options, and you can see there are many, many options in here. And from there, I can usually find what it is that I'm looking for. But of course, if I want to find IntelliCode and I want to know how to set it up, I'm going to bring up my browser because that is my encyclopedia. And I'm going to put in IntelliCode Visual Studio 22, and it's going to tell me what it is. And in here, it will tell me how to find it, how to set it. So I confess to using Google quite a bit. So here we already have how do I enable IntelliCode in Visual Studio, and we get step-by-step instructions and a link to the article in Microsoft. So programming by Google is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, and in many times it can save you a tremendous amount of time. The combination of doing so and the power of Visual Studio, for me, makes for a very powerful experience. So that's my introduction, and I'm sure we'll be talking about more things that we can do in Visual Studio as well.
Thank you so much. Yes, that was great introduction, and really nice to see that you started out with IntelliCode, because I think there's no doubt that IntelliCode is one of the really nice features coming with some of the latest editions of Visual Studio. I had a discussion the other day with, just let me share my screen again here, with another friend of mine who we talked about so the value of IntelliCode, and there's no doubt that once IntelliCode gets to know you and gets to know your project, it becomes even more productive than just in the beginning. So how about you other guys here at the call? How is your experience with IntelliCode?
Before you go on, I have to say that I'm taking a picture of this little crown in my head, and I'll be putting that on my website. Too funny. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
IntelliCode is very useful, especially when you write the code for entities, for example, because for the 80% of the time, it recommends the right field, the next right field to you. So it's very useful and productive, honestly, every time. Yeah. If you try to type, I don't know, first name, it proposes last name, address, city by itself without typing anything. So this is great for me. And since 1 week, there is also the chance to use Copilot from GitHub in Visual Studio 2022, and not only on Visual Studio Code. So it's a great combination, I think, IntelliCode and Copilot. It should be great in the future.
What does Copilot do?
For C# is not, let's say, not ready, but they have trained the model for C# because it's better if you work with TypeScript or JavaScript at the moment, but also for C# it starts to be good. And I think in the next months it should be more useful. Okay.
Okay, cool. Martin, how about you? You gotta have a few tricks up your sleeve, don't you?
Being on a Mac, I type out everything myself. Regarding the intelligence or the IntelliCode, or just in general.
Yeah, well, in general. Let's go general.
In general, yeah, let's go general tips and tricks. I'll start off with a story. It's not far away, a long time ago, but it's quite a few years ago, and in a different company. I worked as a Xamarin developer also, coincidentally. And we had this consultancy company coming in, and they had some really strict guys saying, come on, we need some decent code styles. We need to be able to review our codes. We need a standard around what we're doing. And they brought in a very specific ordering to properties, method, fields, and all that kind of good stuff. Not necessarily supported 8 years ago in Visual Studio, but that was a manual thing to check up, seeing that everything was code style wise in the correct order. Since then, the project ended. It was quite fairly large project. We were 20 Xamarin developers and 5 dedicated testers, so there was a lot of code being maintained, and needed that styling and stuff to be in the correct order for everyone to kind of be productive in a way that you would always know where to look for your methods, your privates, your publics, your overrides, and stuff like that, static classes, methods, whatever. So that's what I want to touch upon today, that code style. What can we get code style-wise in Visual Studio out of the box? And the reason for I want to do that is that I came over that big hurdle of getting into having your code structure or code style really firm, in a way that since then it's always been, for me, important to have that set up. So everyone knows where to expect, what to look for, not only in your repository or your structuring of your projects and classes in the hierarchy within Visual Studio and your project, but also within your classes, how it's code structured. So I would like to kind of touch upon that, and let's see how that can be managed to some point in a, let's say, vanilla setup in Visual Studio. I know there's a lot of analyzers you can put on top of this, but let's see what we can do sort of out of the box. First off, this is a VM, Azure VM. So if you don't feel that you have your right tools, or you can't set up Visual Studio 2022, get a free Azure account. You get $200 credits for free, and there is a image, a VM Windows image with a 2022 Visual Studio pre-configured, and that will take you 10 minutes to spin up, and then you can try whatever you want. So that is the first trick, but not for code styling, but more of a how to have a machine to work on. So first off, this is just a really simple console project. Doesn't do anything important. But what I want to quickly show is, if we go into the options, we have the possibility to set in the text editor or the C# code style, there's this nifty tool where you can tell Visual Studio how to treat your code. I hope you all can see this. Let me get it a tad bit bigger. There's a lot of possibility to configure how your code should be arranged, how the type and the style of the code that should be treated in your project. As you can see, you can set up what should be preferred and what the severity should be, if it should be refactoring, if it should come without suggestion hints. As you can see down in the compile build output, there's suggestions. You can set them to warnings or errors. So in here, you can just do whatever you want. But I would say that we prefer using the on-type var as our, and if we set that as errors and select OK, that sets up your local environment, your Visual Studio, to how your coding style is preferred. And if you then do something like, oops, sorry about that. If we say something like string test equals test, it gives us that squiggly red line saying use var instead of doing that. So that is very nice. You can set up all these rules for yourself, but that's not necessarily something that is catering to getting that common style on your project, where everybody is doing your coding style in the same way. What you can do is you can go to add, and then you can add a new editor config. This might take a few minutes. I've never seen it take anything taking those few minutes, as it's exciting. What this basically gives us is an editor config. We just pin this. So it creates an editor config file that you can put into source control. This has all the information regarding the same configuration of your code style that you can set within this. You can also open this up in a other editor. Let's say we would do that in a source code text editor. Right now it's quite empty, so there's nothing in it. That doesn't really do anything, but you can put in all those rules within this editor config file, and those will then override the ones you have set locally for your Visual Studio in your tools. So that is a way of achieving that common way of having a style options supplied for your project.
That's quite nice. Yeah, that's really a nice successor of StyleCop, I guess, and analyzers. Yeah, I know we use it a lot in our projects, and it works really good. Do you know if it's possible to, because you said that we could have this shared config file or editor config file for the project? Do you know if it's possible to actually span it across more than one project?
Yes,
I don't know if that is possible.
If you have that in your solution, if you place it within your solution, that will like have a hierarchy where you can have that override all of your configs for a single project. So you have one solution-wise instead of a simple project configuration. So you don't have to have multiple config files, but you can just have one per solution that you have in your source control. For some reason, this is trying to merge stuff in.
Yeah, but that is really great. Yeah.
Let me just.
You're on a Mac. You're excused. So.
Well, this is actually a Windows PC. So let me just see. Oh, okay. Perhaps, Emmanuel, you can touch up on this Git thing in Visual Studio. I'm not that.
So I see that Kasper, you have a comment.
I just wanted to ask, is this feature tied to Visual Studio, or is it tied to the compiler, so you could add it to the build step maybe not
That
everybody are
is-
using Visual Studio.
That is tied to the Rosman compiler, so you can use JetBrains or whatever your favorite tool is for doing code. So this is not tied into Visual Studio. Of course, the ones that you have, you go into tools and text editor and set that is specific for your Visual Studio and put into those settings within your Visual Studio. If you have them in a config file, editor config file, that will be usable across your build pipelines or whatever tools you use to use for C# development.
Nice.
Cool.
So,
Jesus, do you have any good tips for us?
Yes, indeed, I have. I have a couple of, let's say, features that I like in Visual Studio. Not too glamorous, as previously presented, but yeah, I think that it's worth to share anyway, so I will do it. Let me share my screen very briefly. Okay. I have an ultra wide monitor, but I split it into windows too, so people can see it better. Okay, you can see right now, if you are used to work in Visual Studio, that this is not the default layout for Visual Studio. This is my personal one, and it looks better in an ultra wide, but yeah, you have to trust me on that. And I put the Solution Explorer to the left, similar to Visual Studio Code, and things like that. But you sometimes have different setups. Like if you work from home and you have like 3 monitors or a huge ultra wide monitor, but on the office, back in the office, you only have one extra, I don't know, 24 inches monitor, you probably want to set up differently. So instead of customizing manually every time, you can do is save a layout. And in my case, I use it when I have to record a video, and I try to use the default layout for Visual Studio so people don't get like confused by my weird and customized layout. And you can see that every time you save a layout, it automatically assigns a shortcut key. So in this case, if I want to go back to the default so people can see it better, I just need to do Ctrl-Alt-2 in my case. You can prompt to not show that message again. And it will reset the layout to that one. And when I'm working again or in my work from home setup, I can do Ctrl-Alt-1 and go back to my default and preferred way to do it. You can save it from Windows, manage layout, apply, or save the current Windows layout that you have. So it's quite nice. Another feature that will be interesting.
Before you move on, and I don't mean to interrupt, I have a wish list item for Visual Studio that not only does it save these Windows layout, but what I really want is for it to save the state of my actual code windows and the breakpoints and anything else that I'm working on, and then name it in exactly the same way, so that if I'm working on one feature and then I get a bug request, I can quickly switch and then switch back. So what you're showing is terrific, but I want more. So I just did a blog post on what's not in Visual Studio 2022 that I want, and I've also fired that off to the team, because what you're laying out here is terrific, but as I say, they could really enhance it. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, don't worry about it. But yeah, we always want a little bit more. And yeah, that feature will be terrific. Yeah, another thing that came to my mind when I see the style config, when you set up the default code style preference for your project or your solution, it's another use case that happens to me very often, that when I onboard new people to a project that work for the same team, but in a different project, sometimes they don't have the tools that need to build the solution that we are onboard that person on. So you can do something similar to the style config, which is called the installation configuration file, which is a VS config. That what it does, it's let you specify which components in Visual Studio are needed for this project. So you can like specify which work loads you need to be selected as part of your installation, which individual components are needed. For example, for this one, it's quite old at this point, and it requires the .NET Core 3.1 runtime to be built and run. So yeah, you can specify that things, choose which individual components are needed for your specific solution, and export it as a file. So you have that file as part of your solution. So when people need to use, you can see there is an article about it, so I can show you the image. They will be prompted with this. Based on your solution, you might need to install extra components for a full development experience. So you can provide the people the guidance about which specific tools in Visual Studio are needed to be completely productive and be able to work with your specific product or project. So yeah, that's a way to like kind of guide people to the right tools, because yeah, sometimes you open a project, and this happens also with examples or code available in GitHub. You clone a project and you're trying to build it, and you got a lot of error like missing tools, runtime not found, SDKs are not installed, and things like that. So yeah, you can see that. Let me show you the file. Is quite simple, and it's here. This VS config that just specify the components that are needed for this solution, and it's quite nice for new people. And the last tip, which is kind of miscellaneous, and some people would like it or not. Let me show you one more that cool people find interesting. When you open a solution in Visual Studio or a project, you always be restored to the last file that you had opened when you close it. And that expands the tree and the navigation on your Solution Explorer. For some people, like me, I think that that's quite useful. But for other people, it's like a waste of time, and sometimes it can reduce the performance in Visual Studio. So you can tune that little setting, which is called restore. Yeah, here. Reopen documents on solution load, or restore Solution Explorer hierarchy state on solution load. So you can choose if you want. By default is checked, but as you can see, I just uncheck it. So every time I reopen a solution or a project, it's like collapse again, and I need to start searching for what I want to work. So it is based on your preference, but that can help. That can help, and
that is some really cool features. Thank you for that. We got a question if they are available in other versions of Visual Studio than the Enterprise Edition. And did we lose Jesus?
Probably most of us are using Enterprise, so not sure which are there and which are not. Most of these basic things are in all the way down to the Community Edition, but certainly in the Professional Edition.
Yes, I think these features are available also in the Community and Professional, not only on Enterprise. Enterprise, if I remember exactly, has only the test and the load testing and other stuff. But this feature is available on the Professional as well and the Community, if I remember.
Yeah.
Now at the end we have a lot of text files in our solution root folder, like the VS config, the edit config, the git ignore, the Docker files, and stuff like that. So.
All right, Jesus, thank you so much for that. And actually, Mr. You got the tattoo, Manuel. Won't you continue with your tips and tricks?
Yes, of course. Okay. Let me share my screen, my second screen as well, because I use a widescreen like Jesus, and so I have to split my screen by 2. Do you see my screen, right?
Yep.
Oh, of course. Okay.
Yes.
So the flow when you work on with GitHub repo, more or less are for everyone the same. And I mean, you go to GitHub on your repo, click on clone, and you clone the repo with a GitHub desktop or stuff like that, with GitHub desktop or GitKraken, or I don't know. But from Visual Studio 2019, we have a GitHub extension out of the box, so you don't need to install an external GitHub extension. So you can work directly with GitHub and DevOps from Visual Studio. So, for example, if I want to clone a project directly from Visual Studio, I can click on this button, and let's say no one click on this button because I saw the analytics from Visual Studio team, and very few people use this clone repository button, but it's very useful because if you click here, you can directly select GitHub or Azure DevOps. And if I click on GitHub, Visual Studio retrieve all my repos from my private account and also from an organization account, for example, and also all my forked repository and stuff like that. But if you want to work on my repo, for example, I can choose the local path and click on clone. Okay, and if I click on clone, you start to clone my repo on my PC as well. So, and in this case, I have my solution up and running in a few seconds. And I don't have any editor config or VS config for this project, but I use the edit config for every project. And I use the same file, and I copy and paste from my OneDrive the edit config. So this is the way I use edit config. But you can do another stuff, because if you want, for instance, every day I start to, create new project for testing new stuff and stuff like that. And if you create a new project, for example, a console application on the desktop, okay, with .NET 6 is not important, okay. So you have a new console application, and you want to add this application, this example, to a GitHub repo, for example. So what you, what I done before, maybe 6 months, is create a repo on GitHub directly with the website, clone the repo on my GitHub folder on my local PC, and then I cut and paste my project, okay? And of course, I need maybe 5 minutes to do that. But below on the right corner here, you have this awesome button, add to source control, okay? And if you click here and then on Git, you can choose directly if you want to upload this code to GitHub or an Azure DevOps repo. If I choose GitHub, I can also add a README file, okay? I can choose also a git ignore file. For example, I use Visual Studio ignore file, okay? If you don't want to your repository the OBJ files and stuff like that, and the dirty stuff like that, okay? And then you can choose your account, GitHub account here, and also the repository name. I can choose WooChamp 2022, a description, and you can select also if this repo is private or not. Okay, maybe if you are shy about your code as every developer at the beginning, because you have a lot of dirty stuff on your code, you can start with the private one, and then you can move your repository to a public repository. Okay, so but if you want to create a public repository, I can uncheck this box, and I can click here on create and push. So after maybe 30 seconds, you have a, or less, it depends on your connection, of course, and on the project, but you have everything to work directly on GitHub. And if I go on GitHub, of course, now I can show you the repository, and then you can start to to change something here. And the Git change tab here is better than the old Team Explorer, because you can manage everything from here without wait for 1 minute to have this tab responsive, okay? And it's very similar, honestly, in the last maybe 1 year, or yes, 1 year, the flow with Git is very similar to Visual Studio Code, okay? Because they learn a lot of stuff from Visual Studio Code, especially for open source stuff and GitHub interaction. And this is why I stopped to use Visual Studio Code, I would say, just to push the code on GitHub and DevOps. Because before, I use Visual Studio Code just to push the changes, merge files, and stuff like that. But now I turn off Visual Studio Code for, I'll say, this specific workflow, of course. And then from here, you can manage everything. You can commit, push everything. This is okay. First commit is I'll say the very first commit for every repo on GitHub. First commit or initial or stuff like that, and you can commit all and push. And if you want, you can also choose from here the branches directly from Visual Studio. Okay. What I missed is a Git flow, I'll say, approach for this tab, but you can install an extension called Git flow for Visual Studio 2022 if you work with Git flow, but it's not, how to say, mandatory to work with Git. So more or less, that's all. If you have a question or
I have a quick comment, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
6 months ago, I wrote a book called Get for Programmers, and we showed everything in Visual Studio and in the command line and in the GitHub desktop app. And if I had it to do over now, because of the incredible progress that Visual Studio has made, I would reverse my emphasis from the command line to Visual Studio. Last few months, I found virtually nothing that I can't do in Visual Studio, and I need to go back to the command line. So they've really made tremendous improvements.
Yeah, exactly. I use only my terminal to work with Git flow, because I used to work with the Git flow from the command line, and this is the only thing that I miss, honestly, for Git in Visual Studio 2022 right now. But it's not specific for GitHub, because if you use GitHub, maybe the 90% of the time you work with the GitHub flow and not with Git flow. But yeah, and if you work with the Git flow, you have this menu here, GitHub, and you can create a new pull request directly from Visual Studio. And there is not, I would say, a UI directly on Visual Studio, because it opens let's say the browser, a new browser, but directly on the new pull request page. But yeah, of course, there are a lot of improvement in this part.
No doubt. Martin, I can see that you have a question.
Yes, I have a question. We have had issues with the cloning inline or in Visual Studio cloning of DevOps projects. It fails to create personal access tokens for doing the connection to DevOps.
Yeah.
Is that something you have a fix for, or is it just the newest update fixes all? Kind of.
No, it's honestly, time to time there is a problem with Visual Studio updates. And for instance, in the last release, I had a similar problem with a project on Azure DevOps. I don't know why, but I didn't have the same problem with the previous one. So I think it's more about Visual Studio and not the integration of Visual Studio or DevOps or stuff like that. So I think you have to wait the next version.
Yeah.
All right, we have another question from Samim.
Yeah, hi. It's not related to the GitHub. I just wanted to know what kind of theme do you use for Visual Studio?
Yes, I use the OneDark Pro theme, and I selected this theme because I use the same theme in Visual Studio 2022, right? Visual Studio Code and also on Rider. So I'm more productive because I don't have to switch with my eyes to different theme, and I use the same theme. I also wrote an article on my blog about the reason why I use the same theme on Visual Studio. And from layout point of view, I switched to the vertical tab, okay, here, instead of have the tab here or here. I have only one, how to say, in files. Maybe it's better if I open another one here. So I use vertical tab, and I use also the colored project tab. So if I add another project and open another file, I have maybe the green color instead of the red. So I can maybe after 3 days on the same project, you can recognize directly the file.
Can you quickly show how you set that vertical tab instead of the standard across the center content? That would be nice.
No, I don't understand.
So the having the tabs vertically.
Yes.
How is that a setting that you just go into the
yes.
text editor?
No, there is a settings here. Tabs and windows here. Groups by project here, and you have to also check this one. No, I don't remember where exactly here, but it's one of these tabs and windows. Colorize this one as well. And you can choose the vertical one from the gear here also, if you want to choose the vertical.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. I gotta try that out. I can see that that's quite obvious. I can also see that you need an extension to create new files. So it's just a shortcut.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, I'm quite confident that our special guest at our next event will be able to talk a lot more about that.
Yes.
Time flies. We have only a few minutes left. So let me share my screen here. So yeah, well, we have made it through the first event, and as mentioned, on the next event, we're gonna take a look at some extensions, how to build them, how to use them, and for that we have Mads Christensen from Microsoft. He's a program manager at Microsoft, who will come and give us some great knowledge about that. You can sign up already now at bit.ly VSChamp2, and it's also online and is in the end of this month. Yeah. We would really like your feedback. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. We are more than willing to answer questions. You can reach out to me, and I will forward them to the speakers here. You can also sign up for the next events, and you'll receive an event survey in the mail, I think already later today. Yeah. I think, yeah, so again, thank you to our sponsors. And with that, I will say thank you to all of you. You really proved my point that there are so many things to learn, whether you are starting to learn to code, if you're an experienced developer, as a handful of us here at least are. There are new stuff to learn all the time. Even in a single product like Visual Studio, it's so big and has so many features. So yeah, it's really hard to grasp them all. Yeah, thank you so much. Don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to answer your questions. Please sign up for the next events. They are online, they're free, you can learn a lot, so please sign up. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for speaking. It's been a true pleasure. See you.